Hi, I'm Amy, and I'd like to give you some tips about your hips. So if you have any pain in your hips, or below the hips, or anywhere above your hips, then you want to pay attention to the location of your hips. That pretty much means everybody. So all you really need are a belt and a dowel stick or broomstick to test this on yourself, okay? So I'm going to back up here so that you can see my hips. The first thing I want you to look for is your side seam on your breeches. So if you don't have a side seam, that's where the belt comes in handy. If you are standing with most of your weight in the heels of your feet, the side seam of your pants should go straight up and down vertically. If you feel for your hip joint, and if you lift your knee up and down, you can kind of feel where the leg bone ends and comes into your hip, then that is one of the points where you want your seam to go. And then it should end. Most pants are made so that the seam ends right at your ankle. If you don't have side seam, that's where your belt comes in. So any belt with a buckle or something that will help it hang straight is what you're looking for. So if you sort of hold the belt so that it's not touching the floor, it's kind of dangling at the level of your ankle, and then find that hip joint again and place the belt right at the hip joint, you should find that if it hangs vertically and follows the laws of gravity, that the buckle should align right with your ankle. Now, I see a lot of two things. One, the weight is being held more forward in the foot. And you can see when I transfer my weight from my heels to mostly in the balls of my feet, then you can see how far forward the buckle comes. And then we're not stacking ourselves up with gravity. And that has a lot of consequences. So let me bring the weight back. I've probably got 80% in the balls of my feet right now. Now I've got about 50-50 in the back of my foot and 50 in the forward part of my foot. And when I have about 80% in the back and my toes are free to wiggle, and I still have my balls of my feet firmly planted on the ground, but only about 20% of that weight, that's when the hip starts to come into good alignment. Now, the second problem I see is my hips are in neutral, and I'll explain that in a moment. But when I take my hips out of neutral, the buckle starts to come forward again. And that does a couple different things, which I'll explain next. So here I'm back in a neutral hip, and a neutral hip allows me to have a nice low back curve. The angle of my sacrum or my tailbone is where it should be, and allows all the other landmarks to be where they should be, including the pelvic floor then is level to the ground. If I go back into that, what we call posterior pelvic tilt, that angles my pelvic floor in not a direction where all those muscles and fascia can function as they should, all those other organs and everything. But when I bring my hip back into neutral, my pelvic floor comes back into neutral. So how can you know if now you know how to stack up properly, but how do you know that your hips are where they should be? So that's where our dowel stick comes in handy. So before we do that, let's find the location. If you go to where your pockets are, and kind of at the top of your pockets, you'll feel these big bones here. And if you find the top of those bones and hook your thumb in there, we're going to take our dowel stick, hook our thumbs in there, and then hold the dowel stick to where those bones are. Okay, if our dowel stick is level, let's first bring our feet underneath our hips and our feet pointing forward. then we know that our hips are level. If you feel a little shift or some wonkiness here, you're going to feel one, I'm shifting my weight into my right foot, and that shifts my hips. Okay, so if you tend to fall into one hip when you're talking to somebody or you're relaxing or standing in line, you're pushing your hips off this direction, and that will cause eventually a change in the thickening of your fascia. More fascia on this side, less weight. So weight bearing on this side means less fascia. Your fibroblasts will literally take that away, deeming you don't need it. So that happens over time. So it's about the postures we spend most our time in, not just if you just do this once in a while or this once in a while. That's actually a good thing. So checking to see if when you're standing in your good posture, do you have a neutral hip from this perspective? So that's one way to check it. Okay, if you look down at this angle from your at your dowel stick, do you see that you have a shift forward one side or the other? So some of us, if we get into a habit of sitting at a desk and we're always reaching in one direction to get the things that we want all day long, then we can have a shift in this direction. Okay, there's other shifts that you can have, but that's more something you'd want to come see me or Caitlin about. Okay, some rotations in other directions. Okay, so the next landmarks I want you to think about, let's go back to those bones by your upper pockets. And then if you find your belly button and you go down until you feel, this is the top of the pubic bone. So when we are standing and looking at that side view, we want all this triangle of bones to be in the same vertical plane. So what does that mean? So if I press the dowel stick here into my pubic bone and into my ASIS landmark up here, if I am in my neutral hip, the ends of the dowel stick should fall in the same plane. Now, if I go to bring my pubic bone forward and I keep those points touching, you can see the bottom part of my dowel stick comes forward. So my pubic bone is forward, and that can be just a little bit or it can be a lot. And if you have this dowel stick forward, you've got some work to do, because then what happens is what I was saying earlier. Your pelvic floor is not at the correct angle. Your lower back curve flattens out, meaning you create a very ripe environment to have a potential disc bulging out there. Your pelvic floor diaphragm is not lining up with your respiratory diaphragm, which can cause breathing issues. You get a tight psoas. There's just all sorts of problems that you can create. So getting your hip into a neutral is not where you have to live all the time. But what I want for everybody is to be able to get into that neutral hip and feel so comfortable here that this is where your body wants to go and is actually craving to go. And then when you are out of alignment, that's fine. Your body loves lots of different positions that you can stand in. We're capable, if it's a position that your body is capable of getting into, it's a perfectly acceptable position for you to be in. You just don't want to be in less than ideal positions for a long time. So I want you to think about that neutral hip. Let's try it. Let's try it as long as we're here. Okay, so think about the neutral hip. We just did all that stuff when you're standing. We'll see if I can do this. This is my chair. So when you're standing, you want that neutral hip. And then when you come down into a sitting position, you want to maintain that neutral hip. So your ASIS, your pubic bone, is still in that same alignment. You've got your low back curve in place. Your pelvic floor is level with the surface that you are sitting on. And that's where you want your body to be, again, most of the time. Most of us, when we sit down, we end up falling back into our cushy couch or our office chair that doesn't have good lumbar support. And we end up flattening our back. Everything in our stomach area gets tight. We can't breathe as well, and our hip flexors get super tight. So again, same rule of thumb, same rule of hip. When you are sitting, you want to be like this as much as possible, but not all the time. It's okay to sit in all these different positions. Just the positions that we put ourselves in over and over and over again shape us. And because the fascial system is all one system, when we create tight pulls in one part of our body, that can pull up into many other parts of the body and cause problems that are seemingly unassociated with where the problem originated. So I hope that was helpful and enlightening and can make a difference for you.